We like to answer your garden questions here on the Garden Basics Podcast. We get a question from Steve, who lives in Martinez, which is in the Bay Area of California. And Steve says, Fred, I'm a longtime listener. By following your logic and advice of your guests, I now have an orchard of about 30 mixed fruit trees. I'm on 3 acres in Martinez. A creek runs through the property with lots of trees. This year, due to an exploding population of rats, ground squirrels, and tree squirrels, I did not get one piece of fruit. Plus, my 12 tomato plants are also being hit. I don't like poisons, though. Any suggestions would be great. Well, one of those people you may have heard over the years is Ed Livo. Ed Livo, fruit tree expert, now with his own gosh darn video page, too, on YouTube. I believe it's called Edible Solutions.
Edible Solutions, you bet.
Edible Solutions.
That's right.
All right, we'll have a link to it in today's show notes. Because he's the only person I know of our age group who would dare put his face on YouTube, and he does.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Well, you know what? I just gave some thought to that. You know, I just moved from Antioch. I was right over the hill from Martinez. Okay, so, you know, he's over there where Muir was, and Muir had a huge orchard there, and I'm sure Muir dealt with all the problems that he's dealing with. My approach would be real simple. He didn't mention raccoons. I had raccoons. Raccoons will go down to a hardware store, get some tools, and then come back and actually take out of any defense that you've got, take it out. But for squirrels, ground squirrels, and rats, I trap. You know, I mostly trap. But if you're doing size control, like if he's been an avid listener of Fred Hoffman for years, he knows that, you know, size control is everything with fruit trees. So if you're size controlling your fruit trees and keeping them down to a reasonable height, then netting actually becomes a valid way of deterring, you know, the squirrels and the rats. Not so much the rats, though. Rats will find a way into everything, I find. So trapping to me has always been the best alternative for those smaller rodents. I use live traps for squirrels, just FYI.
We are here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center on Harvest Day, and one of the examples of netting here is over in the Berry area, where they have this wonderful structure for protecting their blackberries from the heat. But it is secured along the ground with a garden hose, a really thick garden hose going all the way around it. And I think that's very important if you're trying to keep even birds out. Correct. Is you got to secure it to the ground or tie it to the trunk if you're going to net.
Yeah, I've always tied it to the trunk because in the past when I've worked with structures, you know, structures are for the advanced gardener and person who's got time and the inclination to want to put up the structures. So that's up to you. And they're easy to work with. But I've always tied just directly to the trunk and just made it a big bag around the top of the tree. That's always been the best way. But I've even found birds get into that netting too. You know, how did you get in here? I don't get it, but they do.
Trapping and netting seems to be it. Now, you're here at Harvest Day. You're going to be speaking in a few minutes. Give us a little preview of what you're going to be talking about.
I'm going to be talking about container growing. You know, I mean, container growing's become a real big popular thing. I started working with growing in containers, started a program called Ideal for Container Growing back in 1995 when I was with Dave Wilson Nursery, of course. And so I'm just going to share some simple ideas about being successful growing fruit trees in containers and sharing some ideas.
Probably by the time we air this question, the Master Gardeners here in Sacramento County will have posted your talk on YouTube, so we'll have a link to it.
Cool.
But give us 1 or 2 tips right now.
Well, I think one of the things that I'm really big on is I'm really big on a lot of bark in the soil mix, because a lot of these potting soil mixes that you buy at the nurseries and different stores are too fine and particle for these trees that you're going to be maintaining containers for maybe 2, 3, 4 years. And so consequently, you know, the pore space needs to become real important. And the cation exchange, where actually nutrient can bound to in the potting soil, becomes really important. And these potting soils that we buy in the stores actually breaks down too quickly. So I always amend that, and I'll be sharing the amendments. I'm a big fan of chunked core.
C-O-I-R.
Core, you got it. And I'm a big fan. And you know, I hate to say it, but it's been available at Costco now for a couple of years. Did I say that?
I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, and they're carrying the chunk form, not the shredded form. The shredded form's real hard to get the percentage of right for your mix. But the chunk is a cinch because It's big chunk, adds porosity, adds water holding capacity, expands your watering between waterings, and at the same time breaks down and adds acidity to your potting soil.
But how do you get it moistened in the first place?
Same way you do peat moss. It's no different. You just pre-moisten it, stick it in a wheelbarrow, stick it in buckets, chunks in a bucket. And the ideal thing is that you only need to add a sixth to your entire volume to get the what do you call it, the positive results from it. It's just wonderful stuff. And I've been an advocate of core. I've been an advocate of core forever and used it forever.
With Quatru, if you just buy a big bag of it, you could just open the top of the bag and fill it full of water and go do something else.
Well, you'd have to put it in the bag because usually it comes in compressed bales.
Oh, okay. So, get a wheelbarrow.
Yeah, you get a wheelbarrow and let it, because I think one of those blocks compresses out to, or expands out to about 2 cubic foot. And you don't really need that much.
Oh.
You would have your plants would be floating.
Another great use for those 30-gallon trash cans that your waste disposal company doesn't pick up anymore, but those plastic cans are good for just that very purpose, for moistening peat moss or coir.
It's even funny you mention that. That's what I use. Yeah, I use one of those big garbage cans, and then I put it in there. And peat moss, too. I don't use as much peat anymore, but in my blueberry mixes, I still recommend a sixth peat and a sixth coir. So then along with bark and the acid potting mixes. So that's pretty much. I think I've simplified it to 2 standard potting mixes that I recommend now. What I call, a basic potting mix, and then a potting mix that is more for acidic or acid-loving plants.
Well, the acid-loving plant, the blueberry mix you just mentioned, we might as well finish it off there, because it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So in the old days, it was 1/3 of an RAC soil, rhododendron azalea camellia, so an acid-based soil. Right. It was 1/3 of small bark.
Yeah, 1/4 inch minus pathway bark.
And 1/3 peat moss.
And 1/3 peat moss, correct. But now I've changed that into a sixth peat moss and a sixth coir.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the only difference.
Now, what's your other mix?
Well, the other mix is actually more just 50%. And I love acid potting mixes because typically the biggest problem that we deal with growing in containers is that our waters run, very high pH. And so you're battling that. And most of our deciduous plants and our citrus, and they all like a more acid mix. And so you're in a controlled environment inside a container. And so, take advantage of that. That's why I always recommend that you use an acid potting soil as your base, because I think that's a good place to start. In the long run, I always use acid fertilizers anyways, and I'm really big into at least one application of a humus-based acid fertilizer at least once during the season. I love Grow Power, love Down to Earth. They're both good products that are humus-based. That really gets the bioactivity going. I like it to be that first fertilization, like in February, so that bioactivity gets going just before the plant starts, launching itself in the spring.
Yeah, and just to clarify one thing, when you're mentioning pH numbers, on the pH scale, acidic soil is low pH number, like a 5 or a 6, whereas alkaline pH is high. It could be over 7.5, it could be 8, could be even higher than that. And the water that comes out of your tap, if you're on municipal water supply, could be very alkaline.
It's not uncommon for it to be as high as 9.95. So it can be really alkaline in this state.
More important then, like you say, would be an acid soil mix.
Yeah, acid soil mix and an acid fertilizer as well. I think it's also good to do things like soil tests, occasionally, so you definitely know what you're playing with. Containerizing plants means that you really want to know, what your chemistry is in your pot. So that's really important to occasionally do a soil test. And soil tests can be pretty cheap now. You can get some really neat soil tests for a pretty reasonable price. So.
Well, I still like the fact that the University of Colorado, Texas A&M, and UMass Amherst will do it for between $15 and $20 for anybody in the country.
They will, and that's pretty cool. But I've actually gone to my own soil kit, and because the tests that I'm doing are so simple anyways, and I'm not really looking for the complexities that I used to be looking for. pH is probably one of the most important things. Am I hitting my numbers? That's probably the most one. If I'm fertilizing with an organic fertilizer, I just find that, usually my nutrient balance is pretty good inside the container if I'm fertilizing on the program that I recommend, which is a spring, midsummer, and a late.
Debbie Flower wants to know why you're not talking about pumice.
Why I'm not talking about pumice? Well, pumice is fine, but for me, I want all organic matter in that soil because I just want the bioactivity.
Well, now, come on now. Pumice is organic. It's just rock.
It's just rock. That's it. So, I don't know whether or not the mineral extract off the pumice, and maybe Debbie could educate me in that fact, is really that beneficial as opposed to being able to add, added as a supplement, as an input. So
Hamburger helper.
Correct. Yeah, right. And it used to be the argument. Was never that. What was the argument before? Bark? You're adding bark? What do you mean bark?
Yeah,
that robs all the nitrogen in the soil. Well, give me a break. I mean, you're in a controlled environment. Your idea is, what are you buffering? You're buffering for soil drainage over a long, long period of time. And so, what do you have to do to complement? We have to take and understand that the fertilizer needs are probably going to be a little bit more aggressive.
There. That was a scenic bypass that went from rat squirrels and raccoons into soil pH.
I think we've done that for years.
All right.
We are the kings of scenic bypasses.
Ed Livo, Ed Able Solutions.
Ed Able Solutions on Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube.
We'll have a link in the show notes. Ed, thank you.
Oh, you're always welcome, Fred.